Hey, real quick, before we even start, did you catch that? That tiny pause right at the beginning? That little moment where I stopped for half a second before saying, "Before we even start"? That wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't bad English. That was something every single native English speaker does, every single day, without even thinking about it. And today, that one small habit is going to be the whole focus of our lesson. Hi, I'm Alex, and welcome back to English in Fluency, the channel where we don't just study English, we actually try to feel it, hear it, and live inside it the way real people use it every day. If this happens to be your first time here, hello. It's really nice to have you. And I think you picked a great lesson to start with. Because today, we're talking about something that almost no textbook ever explains clearly. And that's hesitation. I'm talking about those little sounds and small words that real English speakers use constantly while they're thinking, choosing their words, or simply buying themselves a second or two before continuing a sentence. Let me tell you something honest. Years ago, long before I started teaching, I remember sitting in a cafe in another country, trying to follow a conversation in a language I was still learning, and I kept getting completely lost every single time the speaker paused and made a strange little sound in the middle of a sentence. I genuinely thought, for a while, that something was wrong, that maybe I had missed an important word, or that the grammar had suddenly changed and I just didn't understand it. It took me a long time to realize that those sounds weren't problems at all. They were just thinking noises, completely normal pauses that every fluent speaker uses naturally. And once I understood that, listening suddenly became so much easier, almost like a fog had lifted. And here's something else I think is worth admitting, honestly. Even after years of studying that language, certain hesitation sounds still caught me off guard sometimes, simply because every language on earth handles thinking time just a little differently. Some languages use longer, comfortable silences. Some repeat a whole word 2 or 3 times in a row. Some use a quiet little click or breath instead of a clear sound. English happens to love these small filler words. Well, and once you simply accept that as part of the natural personality of the language, rather than viewing it as some kind of mistake or flaw, everything becomes so much easier to follow and so much less stressful to listen to. So if your own first language doesn't really use sounds like or in quite the same way, please don't worry. You haven't missed some hidden rule. You're simply learning a brand new rhythm. And like any rhythm, it gets more comfortable the more your ear gets exposed to it. That's exactly the gift I want to give you today. If you've ever listened to a native English speaker and thought, why do they keep saying and, well, and, so many times, is their English actually bad? Then I promise you, nothing is wrong with their English at all. Quite the opposite, actually. Hesitation is one of the clearest signs of natural, relaxed human speech. And once your ear learns to recognize it properly, your listening skills are going to jump forward in a really noticeable way. Instead of feeling confused every time you hear a pause, you'll start using that pause as a clue, almost like a signal that tells you something important is coming right after it. Honestly, that's a small superpower, and by the end of this lesson, it's going to belong to you too. So here's our plan for today. I'm going to walk you through 8 short, very natural conversations between everyday people. We've got a couple trying to decide on a restaurant, two co-workers discussing a slightly late report, a brother and sister planning a trip together, someone going through a nervous job interview, two old friends catching up on the phone after weeks apart, two strangers having some quick small talk while waiting for a bus, two co-workers grabbing coffee in a rush, and two close friends sharing a quiet, emotional goodbye. In every single one of these little scenes, you're going to hear real hesitation in action. Words and sounds like, well, you know, I mean, let me think, actually, kind of, sort of, to be honest, I guess, and even those funny little moments where someone starts a sentence, realizes it's wrong, and restarts completely. I'll explain what each one really means, why people use it, and then I'll give you small chances along the way to practice listening for it, and eventually, using it yourself. Stick with me until the very end, because I've got a simple challenge waiting for you there, one that's genuinely going to help you sound more confident and more natural the next time you speak English with someone. All right, let's get into it together. Before we listen to our very first conversation, I want to explain something that completely changed the way I personally think about listening, and I think it'll do the same for you. When people speak in their first language, they don't plan out every single word in advance, like a written essay. Speech happens in real time, right there in the moment, and thoughts are forming in the brain at almost exactly the same instant the mouth is producing sound. So sometimes the mouth gets just a little ahead of the brain, or the brain simply needs an extra second to choose the right word, the right idea, or even a kinder way to phrase something so it doesn't sound rude or harsh. And in that tiny little gap, in that small flicker of thinking time, a sound or a short word slips out. Not because the speaker forgot their own language, not because something is broken, but because that little sound, that or well, is doing a job. It's holding the floor. It's quietly telling the listener, wait for me, I'm still here, I'm still talking, I just need one more second to get this right. Think about it, like driving a car down a road you don't know very well. Suddenly, the path ahead looks unclear. Maybe there's a sign you don't fully understand, or a turn you're not totally sure about. What do most drivers do in that moment? They don't slam on the brakes and stop the engine completely. They just ease off the gas a little, slow down, and give themselves a few extra seconds to figure things out before continuing forward. Hesitation in speech works in almost exactly the same way. The speaker doesn't shut down the whole sentence. They just slow the engine down for a second, fill the gap with a small sound, and then keep driving once they know exactly where they're headed. For learners working toward a strong B1 level, this is genuinely one of the most useful listening habits you can build, because once your ear gets comfortable with these little sounds, you'll discover something wonderful. They're actually signals, almost like flashing lights. A pause very often arrives right before a decision, a number, a name, an important detail, or a correction. So instead of feeling lost every time you hear one, you can start treating it as a clue, a little warning that something meaningful is about to follow. Your ear becomes sharper this way. You start predicting what's coming, and predicting, more than almost anything else, is one of the biggest secrets behind understanding fast, natural English. There's one more thing I want to clear up before we move on, because I know a lot of learners worry about this. A lot of people assume that hesitating while speaking makes them sound weak, or unprepared, or somehow less fluent. I want you to let go of that idea completely, right now, because it's simply not true. Confident, highly fluent native speakers hesitate constantly. Lawyers hesitate in courtrooms. Politicians hesitate during interviews. Professors hesitate while explaining complicated ideas to a room full of students. The difference between someone who sounds nervous and someone who sounds confident usually isn't whether they hesitate. It's how naturally that hesitation flows into the rest of what they're saying. So please, don't be afraid of pausing. Don't be afraid of saying, And definitely don't think silence followed by panic is somehow more polished than a relaxed little pause filled with a natural sound. It almost never is. Okay, now let's actually meet our first two people. Lena and Marco had been standing outside a small restaurant for almost 5 minutes, just staring at the menu posted in the window, trying to decide whether this was really the place they wanted to eat at tonight. Marco finally turned to Lena and asked, "So, are we doing this or not?" Lena took a small breath and said, I don't know. I mean, the prices look kind of high, don't you think?" Marco shrugged a little and said, "Yeah, maybe. But everyone keeps telling me the pasta here is incredible." Lena glanced at the menu one more time, sighed, and said, Okay. You know what? Let's just try it. I'm starving anyway. Did you catch those two small sounds? Let's slow that moment down together for a second. When Lena said, I don't know, she wasn't actually confused about her opinion on the restaurant itself. She was thinking about how to express her concern politely, because she didn't want to sound too negative right at the start of the conversation. That little gave her brain just one extra second to choose her words a bit more carefully. And when Marco said, "Yeah, maybe, but everyone says the pasta is amazing," his appeared right before he changed direction in his own sentence. He started by sort of agreeing with Lena's worry about the price, but then quickly shifted his opinion and gave a reason to stay. That short marked the exact moment his thoughts turned a corner. Here's a small fact that I genuinely think will help you a lot going forward. Are the two most common hesitation sounds in all of English, and people who study real conversation closely have noticed that tends to signal a very short pause, just a tiny gap, while tends to signal a slightly longer pause when the speaker needs a touch more time to think things through. You don't need to memorize this like some strict grammar rule, but just start noticing it the next time you're listening to someone speak naturally. A quick often comes right before a fast correction or a sudden change of direction. A longer often comes right before a bigger decision, something like choosing a place, a date, a number, or a personal opinion. Now here's your very first little practice moment together. I want you to imagine you're standing right there with Lena outside that restaurant. I'm going to ask you a simple question, and I genuinely want you to answer it out loud, using a small hesitation sound before your answer, because that's exactly how a relaxed native speaker would naturally respond. Ready? Here's the question. Do you want pizza tonight, or something a little healthier? Go ahead, pause this video for a few seconds if it helps, and answer using or somewhere before your response. Something like, I think I'd actually rather have pizza tonight. Or, maybe something healthier feels better today. It might feel a little strange at first, especially if your own language doesn't really use small filler sounds like this one. But trust me, practicing this tiny habit trains your mouth and your ear at exactly the same time, which is honestly the fastest way to make it feel natural. Let's move on to our second pair of friends, although honestly, this time they're co-workers rather than friends. Sarah and Ben work together in a fairly small office, and right now, Sarah is trying to explain gently why the monthly report is going to be a little late. Ben walked over to her desk and asked, "Hey, is the report ready? The manager's been asking about it all morning." Sarah looked up from her screen and said, "Well, it's almost ready. There's just one section I'm still working through." Ben raised an eyebrow and asked, "Okay, so when do you think it'll actually be done?" Sarah thought for a second and answered, "So, I was thinking maybe by tomorrow morning. I just need to double-check all the numbers because, well, last time I made a small mistake there, and I really don't want to repeat that again." Notice how well showed up right at the very start of Sarah's first answer. In English, well is one of those small but wonderful words that can mean so many slightly different things depending on the exact situation. But very often, especially here, it's used to gently soften disappointing or unwanted news, or to introduce an answer that isn't quite what the other person was hoping to hear. Ben clearly wanted to hear, "Yes, it's ready." But Sarah had to share something a bit less perfect than that. So she reached for well to ease him into it gently, almost like a soft cushion placed right before the actual information. Instead of bluntly saying, "No, it's not finished," she eased into the truth a little more kindly. "Well, it's almost ready." And then there's "so." Ben used "so" to move the conversation forward, almost like he was organizing his next thought out loud in real time. "So, when do you think you'll finish it?" Sarah echoed that same pattern in her own answer. "So, I was thinking maybe by tomorrow morning," as if the word "so" were a small bridge connecting one idea to the next, while she figured out exactly what to say. This pattern shows up constantly in real, casual English conversations. Words like "well" and "so" very rarely carry their strict dictionary meaning once people are speaking naturally. "Well" doesn't always mean good, and "so" doesn't always mean therefore. A huge amount of the time, they're simply small tools speakers use to manage the rhythm of a conversation, to soften unwelcome news, to organize their own thoughts, or to gently shift from one topic toward the next without sounding abrupt or rude. Let's try a small practice together right now. Think of a tiny piece of news you might need to share with a friend someday. Something not quite perfect. Maybe you're running a little late, or you forgot to bring something you promised. Try saying it out loud, starting with "well." For example, "Well, I'm actually running about 10 minutes behind. Sorry about that." Notice how that single word softens the whole sentence just slightly, how it gently prepares the listener for the real information that's about to follow. This small habit, once it feels natural, instantly makes your spoken English sound warmer, kinder, and far more native, instead of overly blunt or sudden. Now let's listen in on a brother and sister, Ivy and Oscar, sitting together at their kitchen table, trying to plan a trip and agree on a reasonable budget. Oscar said, "I think we should spend around $800 total. You know, for both of us combined." Ivy frowned slightly and said, "You know, that actually sounds kind of low. I mean, flights alone might cost more than that by themselves." Oscar nodded slowly and admitted, "Yeah, I mean, you're probably right. I guess I just wasn't really thinking about the flights when I said that number out loud, you know? And, I mean, are two phrases that B1 learners hear constantly and yet often completely misunderstand. Because in a typical classroom setting, literally suggests you already have this information, and I mean literally suggests this is exactly what I'm trying to say. But in real, everyday speech, these two short phrases almost never carry their literal, strict meaning. Instead, they work more like little pieces of glue, gently holding sentences together while a speaker organizes their thoughts in real time. When Oscar said, "I think we should spend around $800, for both of us," he wasn't actually checking whether Ivy already knew that detail. He was simply adding a tiny natural pause, almost inviting her to picture the situation along with him while he finished forming his complete thought. And when Ivy used, right before saying, "Flights alone might cost more than that," she was using the phrase to explain, support, or clarify what she had just said a moment earlier. Very frequently appears right before a speaker clarifies, explains, or gives a reason behind their previous comment. It's almost like a quiet way of saying, "Let me explain a little more clearly what I'm actually trying to tell you here." This pattern is incredibly common across spoken English, and once you genuinely start noticing it, you'll begin hearing it absolutely everywhere. In movies, in interviews, in casual conversations between close friends, even in arguments between family members. Here's a small practice exercise for you to try right now, out loud if you can. Try finishing this sentence, adding somewhere that feels natural. "I don't think we should go to the beach this weekend, and then continue with a reason of your own, something like, the weather forecast actually looks pretty rough for Saturday." Try saying the whole thing smoothly, like a real, relaxed conversation, not like you're carefully reading from a textbook page. The real goal here isn't flawless grammar. The real goal is natural rhythm, a comfortable flow, the kind of English that genuinely sounds like one real human being thinking and talking at the very same moment. Now let's move into a longer story. And honestly, I think a lot of you are going to connect with this one emotionally, because almost everyone, no matter what country you grew up in or what language you first learned, knows exactly what it feels like to sit nervously in a job interview. Our main character today is a young woman named Noor. She's sitting in a small, quiet waiting room outside an office, her hands just slightly sweaty, her heart beating a touch faster than usual. She's been preparing for this exact interview for almost 2 weeks now, practicing her answers in front of the bathroom mirror, reading late at night about the company's history and values, and now, finally, the actual moment has arrived. The office door opens, and a man named Felix steps out, smiling warmly. He's the hiring manager, somewhere in his mid-40s, with kind eyes and a calm, steady voice that almost immediately makes Noor feel a little less anxious. "Noor, come on in, please," he says, holding the door open politely for her. Noor stands up, smooths down her jacket with one hand, and walks inside, taking a seat in the comfortable chair across from his desk. Felix begins gently, easing her in slowly. "So, tell me a little bit about yourself, and what makes you interested in this particular position." Noor takes a small, steady breath and begins answering. "Well, I've been working in customer service for about 3 years now, And, let me think, I guess what really interests me most about this specific role is the chance to finally work more directly alongside the design team. Notice that small pause right there. Let me think. It's such an honest, deeply human phrase, isn't it? It clearly tells the listener, I'm genuinely thinking right now. Please just give me one quiet moment. It's polite. It gently buys a little extra time. And it shows the listener that real, careful thought is happening, rather than simply repeating some memorized script word for word. Felix nods encouragingly and continues with his next question. Can you tell me about a time you faced a fairly difficult problem at work and how exactly you went about solving it? Nor pauses again for a second, her eyes drifting slightly to the side as her thoughts gather themselves. Okay. Actually, yes. I do remember one specific time when a client became really upset because their order had arrived quite late. And, the whole situation in the office was getting pretty tense for a while there. She continues a moment later, and I think what really helped was, I just stayed calm throughout the whole thing, and I actually offered them a meaningful discount on their next order, which kind of resolved the entire situation fairly quickly in the end. There's a lot happening packed into that one short answer, so let's slow it down together, carefully. First, is really more of a sound than an actual word, but it shows up incredibly often right before someone answers a more difficult, unexpected, or emotionally complicated question. It clearly signals to the listener that genuine thinking is happening right there, in real time, in front of them. Then Noor says actually, which in this exact context works almost like she's quietly confirming something to herself first. Yes, I really do remember something relevant here. Actually often appears the moment a speaker suddenly recalls a useful piece of information, or wants to gently correct a small misunderstanding, or sometimes simply wants to add a touch of emphasis to something that feels especially true or real to them. Then we have sort of and kind of, two little phrases that B1 learners often mistakenly assume signal weakness in someone's speech, but actually, they perform a very specific and useful job. They soften a statement just slightly, making it feel a little less direct, a little less absolute, and overall a bit more natural and humble sounding. When Noor says the whole situation was getting tense, that's already a fairly strong, clear statement on its own. But by adding sort of right before it, the whole situation was getting tense, she softens it just a touch, almost saying, tense, yes, but not in some extreme, dramatic way, just somewhat tense overall. Native speakers reach for sort of and kind of constantly, in nearly every casual, relaxed conversation, simply because very few real situations in life are completely black or white, completely one extreme or the other. These small, softening words allow speakers to describe their experiences with far more nuance, more honesty, and more genuine emotional accuracy than a flat, absolute statement ever could. Felix smiles warmly and says, "That's a really great example. Thank you so much for sharing that with me." Nora relaxes just slightly in her chair, feeling a small, welcome wave of relief move through her whole body for the first time since walking into the room. The interview continues for roughly 20 more minutes, covering more questions about her past experience, her future goals, and her specific interest in working closely with the design team. Each time Noor faces a slightly harder, more unexpected question, she reaches for these exact same small tools again. Let me think. Actually, kind of, giving herself just enough breathing room to organize her thoughts clearly, without ever once feeling like she's actually failing to answer properly. Near the very end of the interview, Felix leans back comfortably in his chair and says, "Well, I have to be honest. I'm genuinely impressed with how clearly you explain your own experience. We'll be making our final decision sometime by the end of this week, but honestly, I think you're a really strong candidate for this role." Noor smiles, feeling that earlier nervous energy finally settle into something warmer, something closer to real hope. "Thank you so much. I truly appreciate hearing that," she says, standing up to shake his hand firmly before heading out of the office. "Now here's something really important I want you to take away from this entire scene we just listened to together." Noor wasn't a weak English speaker, not even close. In fact, she sounded confident, clear, thoughtful, and genuinely professional throughout the whole interview. And yet, she still hesitated constantly. Let me think. Actually, kind of, sort of. This proves something I really want you to remember from today's lesson going forward. Hesitation is not a sign of weak or broken English. It's a sign of real, natural, thoughtful, human English. Confident native speakers hesitate all the time, in every type of setting imaginable. The real difference between a nervous-sounding learner and a confident-sounding speaker usually isn't whether hesitation appears at all. It's how smoothly and naturally that hesitation flows into the rest of the sentence around it. So here's your practice moment, connected to this particular scene. I want you to imagine you're sitting in a job interview yourself, and someone leans forward and asks you this exact question. Tell me about a challenge you faced and how you personally handled it. Before answering, I genuinely want you to say one of these phrases out loud first. Let me think. Or, actually. Or simply, well. Then continue naturally with your own real, honest answer, even if it ends up being fairly short or simple. The goal here isn't perfection at all. The goal is training your own mouth and brain to reach for these small, natural pauses, instead of either freezing into complete silence or saying absolutely nothing at all whenever you genuinely need a moment to think clearly in English. Now let's listen to one more conversation, a much more relaxed one this time, between two old friends, Priya and Thomas, catching up over the phone after not really talking properly for a few busy weeks. Priya calls Thomas on a quiet Saturday afternoon, and right from the moment he picks up, you can already hear that easy, comfortable energy that exists between two people who have genuinely known each other for years and years. "Hey, it's been forever. How have you been?" Priya says cheerfully, almost laughing as she says it. Thomas chuckles warmly and replies, "I know, right? I've been so busy lately, honestly. Work has just been kind of crazy these past few weeks," Priya asks immediately, concerned. "Oh no, what happened over there?" Thomas pauses briefly and explains, "Well, so, we got this huge new client recently. And basically the whole team has been, working overtime for almost 2 weeks straight now, without much of a break." He continues a moment later. "Anyway, enough about all that boring stuff. What about you? What did you actually get up to this weekend?" Priya starts answering right away, but then stops herself suddenly halfway through her own sentence. "Oh, I went to… Wait, no, actually. Hold on, I didn't go anywhere at all this weekend. Sorry, I think I'm actually thinking of last weekend by mistake. This weekend I basically just stayed home and, What's the word? I guess I just relaxed completely and watched a bunch of random shows the whole time. Thomas laughs warmly and says, "Ha, honestly, that sounds absolutely perfect right now. I really wish I could have done exactly that instead of working so much. There's so much beautiful, natural messiness packed into this short little conversation. And I want to point out a few specific details because this exact kind of speech is precisely what you'll encounter constantly in real life, far more often than the perfectly clean, polished sentences you usually find printed in textbooks. First, notice how Thomas repeated himself slightly. I've been, uh, I've been so busy. This small kind of repetition happens naturally whenever a speaker hesitates briefly in the middle of a sentence, then quietly restarts the same few words again once they feel ready to continue forward smoothly. It's remarkably common in casual speech, and it absolutely doesn't mean anything is wrong. It's simply how real, unscripted speech naturally flows when actual thinking is happening in real time, right alongside the talking itself. Then there's Priya's little moment, which I personally find genuinely charming because it feels so wonderfully human. She starts saying, "Oh, I went to," but then immediately catches her own small mistake and quickly corrects course. "Wait, no, actually, I didn't go anywhere. Sorry, I'm thinking of last weekend instead." This pattern is what we usually call a false start, when a speaker begins a sentence, suddenly realizes it's wrong, unclear, or simply incorrect, and pauses briefly to correct themselves before continuing on naturally. In real conversations, this happens all the time, constantly and skilled. Comfortable listeners learn to follow along smoothly without getting flustered or confused, simply waiting patiently for the corrected version of the thought to arrive a second later. And then we have that lovely little phrase, "What's the word?" which Priya reaches for the moment she's actively searching for the right way to describe something in her own mind. This particular phrase is incredibly useful, and I genuinely want you to add it to your own active vocabulary starting today, because it gives you, as a learner, a polite, completely natural way to pause when you can't immediately recall a word in English, instead of just freezing into silence and feeling embarrassed or stuck. Native speakers reach for this exact phrase constantly, even within their own first language, because finding the perfect word in any conversation, in literally any language on earth, sometimes genuinely takes a little bit of mental searching first. Let's try one more small practice exercise together before we move forward. I want you to try telling me about your own last weekend, but on purpose, somewhere in the middle. I want you to make a small intentional mistake, exactly like Priya did, and then naturally correct yourself afterward. Something like, "I went to the gym on Saturday." Wait, no, sorry. That was actually on Sunday. This might feel a little strange to practice deliberately at first, but it's genuinely valuable because in real conversation, small mistakes and quick corrections happen constantly, all day long, and the more comfortable you feel handling them smoothly and gracefully, the more confident and naturally fluent your overall English is going to sound to the people around you. Now let's slip into one final little scene, a quick, light moment of small talk between two complete strangers, Yusuf and Mara, standing together at a bus stop on a slightly chilly afternoon. Mara glances at her phone and says, "Ugh, this bus is taking forever. Have you been waiting long?" Yusuf shrugs and replies, "Honestly." To be honest, I've been here for like 15 minutes already. I think there's some kind of delay or something going on today. Mara nods and says, "Yeah, I guess that makes sense. The roads did look pretty busy when I walked over here a few minutes ago." Yusuf continues, glancing down the street. "The thing is, this route is usually really reliable, so I'm a little surprised it's running this late today, if that makes sense." Mara laughs softly and replies, "No, totally. It makes sense. I guess these things just happen sometimes. You know, especially during rush hour like right now." Notice how naturally, to be honest, slipped into Yusuf's very first sentence. This phrase often signals that a speaker is about to share something a little more direct, personal, or genuinely true, almost preparing the listener gently for an honest opinion or admission. Then there's "I guess," which Mara uses twice in this short exchange, and it works almost like a soft, gentle agreement, suggesting, "I think you're probably right, but I'm not stating this with complete, absolute certainty." And finally, "the thing is," and "if that makes sense," are two incredibly common phrases that speakers reach for right before explaining something a little more complicated, or right after explaining something, simply checking in gently to see whether the listener followed along smoothly. None of these phrases are particularly complicated grammatically, but together they create that warm, natural, slightly imperfect rhythm that defines real, relaxed human conversation between two people who barely even know each other yet. For your final practice moment, connected to these little scenes, try imagining you're standing at that same bus stop, and a stranger asks you, "Do you know if this bus is always this late?" Try answering out loud, using "to be honest" somewhere near the beginning of your response, and then add "I guess," or, if that makes sense, somewhere later in the same sentence, just to get comfortable blending several hesitation phrases together naturally, the exact way real speakers genuinely do, almost without even noticing they're doing it. Now, let's slip into one more quick little moment together, this time inside a busy coffee shop on a Monday morning, where two co-workers, Elena and Davide, are standing in a fairly long line, trying to grab coffee before heading upstairs into a long meeting. Davide checks his watch and says, "Look, I really don't think we have time to wait through this whole line. The meeting starts in like 10 minutes. Elena glances toward the counter and replies, "I know, but basically, I haven't had any coffee at all yet today. And honestly, I suppose I could survive the meeting without it. But I really, really don't want to." David laughs and says, "Fair enough. I suppose we can wait a couple more minutes. But if we end up late, I'm blaming the coffee, not you." When they finally reach the counter, the barista asks what they'd like, and Elena pauses for a second before answering, Can I get, actually, you know, can I just get a regular oat milk latte? Medium size, please?" The barista nods and turns toward Davide, who says, "I'll have the same, actually. No, wait, make mine iced instead, please. It's already pretty warm outside today." Notice how look appeared right at the very start of Davide's first sentence. In casual English, look is often used the moment a speaker wants to gently grab someone's attention, especially right before sharing an opinion, a small warning, or a slightly direct request. It isn't rude exactly, but it does signal that something a little more important or urgent is about to follow. Then there's basically, a word Elena used to summarize her main point quickly. almost skipping past smaller details to get straight to the heart of what she really wanted to say. And I suppose showed up twice in this short little exchange, working almost like a soft, slightly reluctant form of agreement. Fairly similar to, I guess, but just a touch more thoughtful and a little more formal sounding. Notice too how both Elena and Davide changed their minds halfway through ordering. Elena started with, "Can I get?" paused, said, "Actually, you know," and then restarted her order slightly differently. Davide did something similar, agreeing to the same drink as Elena at first, then immediately correcting himself, "Actually, no, wait, make mine iced." This happens constantly in real-life ordering situations, at coffee shops, restaurants, and fast food counters everywhere, simply because deciding exactly what we want, especially under a small bit of time pressure, often takes one extra little moment of genuine thinking, even for native speakers ordering comfortably in their own first language. Here's a fun little practice idea connected to this particular scene. The next time you're imagining yourself ordering food or a drink in English, try doing exactly what Elena and Davide did. Start your order out loud, pause briefly, and then naturally change your mind partway through, using a phrase like, "Actually, you know what?" or "Wait, actually," before finally finishing with your real, true choice. It feels surprisingly freeing once you actually try it a few times, almost like giving yourself quiet permission to think out loud in English, instead of feeling pressure to plan a perfectly complete sentence before you're even allowed to start speaking at all. Let's listen to one more scene together, a quieter, more emotional one this time, because hesitation doesn't only show up in light, casual moments. It often appears even more clearly when feelings get a little heavier. Naomi and Theo have been close friends since university, and tonight they're sitting together on a park bench. Because Naomi just found out she's moving to another city for a new job, and she's trying to explain how she feels about leaving. Theo asks quietly, "So, how are you actually feeling about all this?" Naomi looks down at her hands and says, "Honestly, I don't know. I mean, part of me is really excited, but it's just, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm going to miss this, miss you, more than I really know how to explain right now." Theo nods slowly and says, "Yeah, I get that. I mean, I'm happy for you, obviously, but, well, it's going to be strange not having you just a few minutes away anymore." Naomi laughs softly, even though her eyes look a little watery, and says, "I know, right. It's weird. I keep trying to feel only happy about it, but, it's sort of both at the same time, if that makes sense." Notice how much heavier and slower this conversation feels compared to our earlier scenes. And notice, too, how the hesitation sounds here aren't really about choosing the right word anymore. They're about choosing the right feeling. When Naomi says, "It's just, I guess what I'm trying to say is," she isn't struggling with vocabulary at all. She's struggling with the emotional weight of what she's about to say. This is something really beautiful about hesitation. Once you start noticing it, it doesn't only fill gaps of thinking time, it often fills gaps of feeling time too, giving a speaker a small, safe moment to gather enough courage or clarity before sharing something personal or difficult. Native speakers lean on these exact same small words. "I don't know. It's just, I guess," during their most emotional conversations, breakups, goodbyes, apologies, and difficult honest talks with people they love. So the next time you watch a movie scene where two characters are saying goodbye, or apologizing, or admitting something difficult, Listen closely for these same small hesitation sounds and notice how they actually make the moment feel more real, more touching, and more believable, rather than less. For your practice moment here, try finishing this sentence out loud, the way Naomi might, using at least one hesitation phrase naturally inside it. I'm really going to miss this. I guess what I'm trying to say is, let your own voice slow down a little as you say it, the way it naturally would if you were saying goodbye to someone you genuinely cared about. Now that we've listened together to 8 completely different conversations, a couple choosing a restaurant, 2 co-workers discussing a slightly late report, a brother and sister planning a trip, a nervous job interview, 2 old friends catching up warmly on the phone, 2 strangers chatting casually at a bus stop, 2 co-workers ordering coffee in a hurry, and 2 close friends saying a quiet, emotional goodbye on a park bench. I want to pause for a moment and talk honestly about why all of this genuinely matters for you, as a learner working steadily toward a strong, confident B1 level and well beyond it. First, and I really want you to take this seriously, hesitation is not background noise that you should try to ignore or filter out completely while listening. It's actually valuable information. Every single time you hear a pause, and your brain should treat that moment almost like a small flashing light that says, pay close attention. Something meaningful is about to follow right after this. Once you train your ear to notice this consistent pattern, listening to fast, natural native speech becomes significantly less overwhelming, because instead of desperately trying to understand every single sound with perfect precision, you start understanding the natural rhythm of the whole conversation. Instead, the gentle rise and fall of thinking and speaking happening together in real time. Second, I want you to notice clearly that hesitation almost always shows up in fairly predictable places, right before an important decision, right before a number or a name, right before someone gently corrects themselves, right before slightly unwelcome news, and right before someone needs to explain something a little more complicated than usual. So, as a careful listener, the moment you sense a pause approaching, you can actually start predicting what category of information might follow right behind it. This is a genuinely real listening strategy that professional interpreters and advanced language learners rely on constantly, often without even fully realizing they're doing it consciously. Third, and this might honestly be the most encouraging point in our entire lesson today, learning to hesitate naturally in your own spoken English is going to instantly make you sound noticeably more fluent, even on days when your grammar isn't quite perfect yet. I know that might sound a little surprising at first, but think about it logically for just a second. If you speak in short, choppy little sentences with long, completely silent gaps every single time you need to think, it can sound nervous, uncertain, or even strangely incomplete to the listener. But if you fill those exact same thinking gaps with small, natural sounds like, well, let me think, or, your speech immediately sounds more connected, more confident, and far more human, even though your brain is doing essentially the exact same amount of thinking either way. These small words and sounds don't slow you down at all. They actually help carry you forward smoothly. Here's one small daily habit I'd genuinely recommend trying for just 1 week. Each morning, Spend literally 60 seconds talking to yourself out loud in English about anything at all. Your plans for the day. Something you saw recently. Anything. The only rule is, whenever you feel yourself needing to think, you're not allowed to go silent. You have to fill that gap with, well, or let me think, instead. It feels strange for about 2 days, and then, almost magically, it starts feeling completely normal, like a small habit your mouth simply picked up without you forcing it anymore. There's one more myth I really want to gently clear up before we move toward wrapping up today's lesson, because I know it quietly worries a lot of learners. Some people genuinely believe that any pause longer than a second or two automatically sounds unprofessional, or weak, or somehow embarrassing. But honestly, that simply isn't true at all. Go back and listen carefully to interviews with respected professors, successful business leaders, or experienced professionals speaking about complicated topics, and you'll notice fairly long, comfortable pauses appearing again and again throughout their speech, often filled with exactly these same small hesitation sounds we've been practicing together today. A relaxed, well-placed pause, especially one filled naturally with or well, or let me think, almost always sounds more thoughtful and more credible than rushing nervously through a sentence without ever stopping to breathe properly. If you happen to be preparing for a listening exam at the B1 level, something like a typical Cambridge-style test or a similar official certificate, this exact same skill genuinely matters there too, perhaps even more than you might initially expect. Examiners deliberately choose realistic recordings filled with natural pauses, fillers, corrections, and hesitation, precisely because they want to test whether you can follow real, authentic English rather than slow, overly clear, textbook-style speech that barely exists anywhere in the real world. So every single time you practice recognizing, well, you know, or let me think in casual conversations like the ones we listened to today, you're also quietly strengthening the exact listening skills that those official exams are designed to measure. In a strange way, today's whole lesson doubles as solid exam preparation, even though it probably felt more like simply enjoying a few relaxed little stories together. There's one more listening strategy I want to share with you because, honestly, it's one of my personal favorites, and it's incredibly simple once you know about it. Pay attention to what happens to a speaker's voice right after a hesitation sound, especially whether it rises or falls. Very often, when someone hesitates, and then their voice rises slightly afterward, they're about to ask a question, suggest an option, or check whether you agree with them. And when their voice falls slightly after the pause, they're often about to state a fact, make a final decision, or simply finish their thought. You don't need to analyze this consciously every single time, but just being aware that pitch and pause work together as a team will quietly sharpen your overall listening instincts over the next few weeks of practice. Let's also try a quick little game together, right here, right now. I'm going to read a short little paragraph out loud, almost like a tiny story, and I want you to count, quietly, in your head, or on your fingers, exactly how many hesitation sounds you hear. Ready? Here it comes. So, yesterday I was, walking to the store, and, well, I kind of forgot my wallet at home, so, I had to go all the way back, and, by the time I actually got to the store, it was, basically closed already. How many did you count? If you counted around 6 or 7 small hesitation moments, you got it exactly right. And that's actually a fairly normal, completely natural amount for a short, relaxed story like that one. This little game shows you something really valuable. Real spoken English is absolutely full of these small sounds, far more than most textbooks ever admit. And once your ear gets comfortable hearing 6 or 7 of them inside a single short paragraph, a full natural conversation is never going to feel overwhelming again. Before we wrap up entirely, I want to give you one more practical tool, something genuinely simple but remarkably powerful if you actually use it consistently going forward. It's called shadowing, and if you've never heard of this particular technique before, I promise it's going to quickly become one of your favorite ways to practice English from this point onward. Here's exactly how it works. Go back and replay one of the conversations we listened to together earlier. Maybe the job interview between Noor and Felix, or perhaps the relaxed phone call between Priya and Thomas, whichever one felt the most comfortable and natural to you personally. Now, instead of just listening passively the way you normally might, I want you to actually try speaking along at the exact same moment as the recording, copying the rhythm, the pauses, the hesitation sounds, even the overall speed, almost as if you're temporarily becoming that person's voice for a few seconds at a time. Don't worry at all about understanding every single individual word with perfect precision the very first time through. Just focus entirely on the music of the sentence, the natural rise and fall, those small sounds, those tiny moments of silence scattered throughout. This might feel a little silly or awkward the first few times you try it, and that's completely normal. Honestly, almost everyone feels slightly strange the first handful of attempts at shadowing. But here's the real magic hidden inside this simple technique. Your mouth muscles, your ears, and your brain are all quietly training together at exactly the same time, learning not just the individual words themselves, but the entire natural flow and timing of real, authentic English speech, including precisely where native speakers naturally pause, hesitate, and breathe throughout a sentence. After practicing this technique a few times with the very same short conversation, you'll likely notice something wonderful starting to happen. Those hesitation sounds that used to feel a little confusing or unnecessary will gradually start feeling completely natural, almost automatic, both in your listening comprehension and eventually in your own spoken English as well. I'd genuinely love for you to try this right now, or perhaps right after this video ends. Pick one short section, even just 10 or 15 seconds long, from any of today's 6 little conversations, and shadow it 3 or 4 times in a row, back to back. You'll likely be surprised at how much more comfortable and familiar those hesitation sounds start to feel after just a few focused minutes of practice like this. Before we move into our recap, I want to gently mention a couple of common mistakes I see learners make once they first discover all of this, because I'd really love for you to avoid them. The first mistake is overusing these sounds in a way that feels mechanical rather than natural, almost dropping an into every single sentence like clockwork, regardless of whether any real thinking is actually happening. Real hesitation only shows up when a speaker genuinely needs a moment, so try to use these tools honestly. When you're actually choosing a word, deciding something, or organizing a thought, rather than sprinkling them everywhere just because you learned about them today. The second mistake is the complete opposite, becoming so worried about sounding unnatural that you avoid pausing altogether, rushing through every sentence at top speed without ever giving your own brain room to breathe. Both extremes feel a little uncomfortable to a listener, so the real sweet spot sits comfortably in the middle. Natural pauses placed exactly where real thinking happens, filled gently with a small sound instead of dead silence, and definitely not forced into every single phrase you produce. The third small mistake worth mentioning is treating every hesitation word as interchangeable. Using in a spot where well would actually sound much more natural, or using in a place where actually would fit far better. This isn't something to stress over heavily while you're still building this skill. Your ear will gradually get sharper just from listening closely and practicing regularly, the way we've been doing together throughout this entire lesson today. One last small piece of encouragement before we recap everything properly. Don't expect this skill to feel perfectly natural after just one single video, even a long, detailed one like today's. Languages are built slowly, through small repeated exposure, a little bit here, a little bit there, conversation after conversation, week after week. So if you watch this lesson once and still feel a little unsure, that's completely fine and completely normal. Come back to it again in a few days, replay your favorite scene, shadow it once more, and notice how much more comfortable it already feels the second or third time around. That quiet, gradual comfort is exactly what real fluency is built from. And here's one final, slightly playful practice idea before we say goodbye for today. The next time you're watching any English movie, show, interview, or even a casual video online, try playing a small game with yourself. Every single time you hear a hesitation sound like, or quietly count it on your fingers, almost like a tiny scoreboard running in the background while you watch. You'll probably be amazed at just how often these sounds appear, sometimes multiple times within a single sentence, even from speakers who sound incredibly confident, articulate, and completely fluent. This small, playful habit trains your ear gradually, almost without any real effort on your part, to notice and accept hesitation as a completely normal, expected part of real spoken English, rather than something strange or unusual that only happens occasionally. Let's do a quick, friendly recap together before we say goodbye for today, just to make sure everything we covered stays fresh and clear in your memory going forward. We talked about the two most common hesitation sounds across all of English, where usually signals a quick, brief pause and usually signals a slightly longer moment of careful thinking. We talked about, well, that gentle little word speakers often reach for to softly ease into difficult news, or to introduce an answer that isn't quite what the listener was originally hoping to hear. We talked about so, which frequently works like a small bridge, helping a speaker organize their thoughts out loud or smoothly move a conversation forward toward its next point. We explored, and I mean two phrases that almost never carry their strict, literal dictionary meaning during casual speech, but instead act like gentle glue, holding sentences together while a speaker quietly thinks something through or explains an idea a bit more clearly. We met, let me think, and, two wonderfully honest, deeply human little phrases that tell a listener clearly real thinking is genuinely happening right now, Please just give me one small moment. We discovered, actually, often reached for the instant someone suddenly remembers something useful, gently corrects a small misunderstanding, or simply wants to add a touch of emphasis to something that feels especially true or important to them personally. We practiced sort of and kind of, two soft, gentle little words that make otherwise strong, absolute statements feel a little gentler, more nuanced, and far more emotionally honest overall. We experienced false starts and natural self-corrections, those completely normal moments when a speaker begins a sentence, quietly realizes something is slightly off, and smoothly restarts without any real embarrassment, alongside that wonderfully useful phrase, "What's the word?" Perfect for those moments when the exact right word simply refuses to come to mind immediately. And finally, we picked up, to be honest, I guess, the thing is, and if that makes sense, four extremely common little phrases that add warmth, nuance, and genuine human texture to even the most casual, everyday conversations imaginable. And then, right at the coffee counter, we noticed look, basically, and, I suppose, three more small phrases that grab attention gently, summarize a point quickly, or offer a soft, slightly reluctant kind of agreement. And finally, on that quiet park bench, we noticed how phrases like, "I don't know, it's just," and "I guess what I'm trying to say is," can carry real emotional weight, giving a speaker a small, safe moment to gather their feelings before sharing something difficult or personal. None of these phrases or sounds are signs of weak, broken, or incomplete English. Every single one of them appears constantly within the speech of confident, fluent native speakers, in job interviews, in casual phone calls, in important business meetings, in warm family conversations, and, honestly, in pretty much every corner of natural spoken English that exists anywhere in the world. The more comfortable you personally become, recognizing these particular sounds and phrases while actively listening, and eventually using them naturally yourself while speaking, the more real, relaxed, and genuinely confident your English is going to feel, both to you internally and to every single person who has the pleasure of listening to you speak. So that's our lesson for today, and honestly, I really hope you walk away feeling just a little more confident about something that probably used to feel confusing or even slightly frustrating. Those small, natural pauses and hesitation sounds that fill real English conversations every single day, all around the world. Remember, the actual goal here was never to eliminate hesitation entirely from your own English. The real goal was simply to understand it clearly, to recognize it confidently while listening, and, eventually, to use it naturally yourself, because true fluency was never really about speaking perfectly without a single pause anywhere in sight. True fluency is genuinely about speaking naturally, thoughtfully, and confidently, pauses, ums, and all those small human imperfections included. If today's lesson helped you even just a little bit, it would honestly mean a great deal to me personally if you took a second right now to hit that like button, because it genuinely helps this channel reach even more learners out there just like you, people who are working hard day after day to truly understand real, natural, unscripted English. And if you haven't subscribed to English in Fluency just yet, now's a wonderful moment to go ahead and do exactly that. And please, don't forget to tap that little bell icon too, so you never accidentally miss a brand new lesson the very moment it gets released. I'd genuinely love to hear from you directly as well, so down in the comments below, please try writing one simple sentence using any of today's hesitation words. Well, let me think. Whatever happens to feel most natural and comfortable for you personally. I'll honestly be reading through the comments myself, and I really do enjoy seeing how all of you put today's lesson into practice in your own unique way. It genuinely makes this whole learning journey feel a lot less like a lonely classroom experience, and a lot more like a real, warm community of people learning and growing together, side by side. And if you happen to know someone else out there who's actively working on their own English, a friend, a classmate, a coworker, honestly, anyone at all, please consider sharing today's video with them. Sometimes the smallest, simplest piece of advice, like finally understanding exactly why people naturally say, so often, can completely transform how confident someone feels heading into their very next real conversation in English. I also want to say, genuinely, that I know learning a language can feel lonely sometimes, especially when you're practicing alone in your room, talking quietly to yourself, or replaying the same short video over and over again just to catch one tricky phrase. I've been there myself, in a different language, feeling like progress was invisible, like nothing was really changing day to day. But these small skills, noticing a pause, recognizing a filler word, predicting what comes next, they really do add up over time, quietly, almost without you noticing. Until one day a conversation that used to feel exhausting suddenly feels almost easy. That's exactly the kind of quiet, steady progress I hope today's lesson gave you a small piece of. Next time, we're going to dive into something equally practical, learning how to understand native speakers when they speak quickly and naturally connect their words together. So make sure you're subscribed and ready for that one too. Thank you so much, genuinely, for spending this time with me today. I really do appreciate you being here. Keep practicing patiently, keep listening closely, and remember, every single pause, every little, every small hesitation you hear from now on, out there in the real world, is simply another small piece of real, natural human English, quietly waiting for you to understand it fully. I'm Alex. This has been English in Fluency, and I'll see you in our next lesson together very soon. Take care of yourself, and bye for now.